Ohio gozaimasu. Watashi wa Christopher Stewart. Sumimasen, I'm never really great about talking about the martial arts. And a lot of it I don't really have a lot of experience, and a lot of it so much I try actually not to talk about, that when you actually want to talk about something, it kind of gets difficult to try and figure out what you want to talk about, what you don't want to talk about, that kind of thing. I gave a similar sort of lecture series in Japan, which actually was terrifying because, here I am in Japan talking about Japanese culture to Japanese, and that's a really frightening thing. Whereas in this case, I'm a little more laid back because I'm not necessarily scared of really offending anybody accidentally. What I've shown you in the past couple of videos on martial arts has been basically our group's overall introduction to ninjutsu and to what we do and so on and so forth. And I say group, you have to understand I trained with somewhere in the neighborhood of 14, 15, 17 senseis. So it's kind of difficult to actually classify us as any particular thing. And some of those senseis are quiet individuals who never do anything with martial arts. They're just old people that happen to know something and were friends. Some of them teach classes and have large dojos. Some of them are specific for film-related martial arts. So, it's kind of a large mixture of the various and sundry things I learned. Let me begin with what exactly happened with me in martial arts. My grandmother had traveled the world and she'd met a lot of people. And she said that she could send me to Japan and I could stay with one or two people that she knew. Turns out I stayed with this wonderful girl. The world knows her as, believe it or not, Major Kusanagi, because she's the Japanese voice Senyu for Major Kusanagi in Ghost in the Shell. And she's a fantastic woman, absolutely wonderful friend, and I love her to death. And I got to stay with her and her family for quite some time. And I then started a very interesting journey, which I never actually expected to. And I started learning martial arts from various and sundry people, and I traveled all over Japan. I was literally all over. I traveled from like Tokyo to Akita to Sendai to Shinjuku to you name it, even some of the islands and so on and so forth. And I just traveled all over the place, and I was visiting various and sundry senseis, and I'd stay with one or two for a day and learn a few things from them, and I'd move on to something else. And one sensei looked at me and laughed and said, it could be that I'm just making up stuff. I could just be telling you what their military drill was in World War II, because I'm a World War II veteran, and this could have nothing to do with anything, and I could just be lying that it has traced back to something because it sounds neat. And I said, so, that's fun. Whatever you want to tell me, I'll just listen to. That's cool. It makes great stories. And I don't really care. If whatever I learn, it goes into the great mix of whatever I learn. And my style is unique in itself because it literally is a cul-de-sac of many different styles, which is one of the reasons why it's so difficult to explain to other people what I can do and what I can't do, that kind of thing, simply because it's everything. There's no real way. I'm a soup. It's it's difficult to say. Some people might look at me and say, what did this particular sensei teach you? And I'd go, I don't know. It's in the mix with everybody else. Come on. But, so much of it is just fun. One of my senseis, when he was sending me on a plane, looked at me and said, Christopher, I have to say this. Of all the people I have ever known in my life, thank you for letting me teach you. And I looked at him and said, I'm honored. Thank you for allowing me to be your student. And he said, no, you don't understand. When you first came to my door, you were miserable. You look like the world has stepped on you and squashed you flat. And to see how much you changed in your training was a joy. It was just an absolute joy to watch you go from that to what you are now. And hopefully you'll be able to take some of this, even in the darkest days of your life, and remember it and go back to it. You know, you're never going to necessarily be this high ever again, but you'll at least have that to actually look back on, to come up to. And that makes everything worth it. And I said, thank you. You know, I mean, there's so many different things I learned there. There was one time I was sitting on a rock in the middle of a stream, and my sensei had this river in where he had little water clocks that would tick and talk and go all the way up and down the stream, and they would go at different intervals so you could listen to it like a symphony. And I was just sitting there quietly listening to everything. And he sat down next to me and he said, "Can I ask you a question?" And I said, "Sure, sensei." And he said, "Why do you want to learn the martial arts? What do you want to get out of it? If I started teaching you things, what would you do with it?" And he left it open. He didn't specifically say anything like, because you're an American, what would you do? Would you open a school? He just was simple, light, asked very open questions. I could have answered anything in the world. And I looked at him and said, first, I'm rebuilding myself. And I started learning that on this journey. It's something I never realized until now. It's that I'm really building my spirit and who I am. And I'm learning more philosophy and spiritual things than I'm actually learning in anything of combat. And I don't really care too much for combat. I'm not someone that would want to compete. I wouldn't want to go into some big competition and go, hey, you know, I'm this rank, this belt, let's go and prove something. I have nothing to prove. And I'm thankful for what I've learned and what I've seen. I mean, literally, this is like one of the best vacations I've ever had in my life. It's a summer vacation that's like my life. Not just memorable, it's everything. You know, it's learning different stories, learning about people's lives. You know, I don't know. When I first started out on this journey, which, you know, sometimes when somebody starts out on a journey, they don't know what they want or what they expect. They don't know what they're looking for. They're just looking. And that was me when I first showed up in Japan. And when I left Japan, it was more of a sense of I found something. Still not altogether sure what, but I had found something. And that was everything to me. It was like a pilgrimage in that sense. And Japan is just such a wonderful country. It's such a peaceful country in so many ways. I would kill to go back there. And when I looked at him and said, but why martial arts? Why ninjutsu? Film. And he looked at me. And I said, I'm an actor. I love doing things in film, anything in film. Doesn't matter what. And the more I learn from martial arts, the better I will be as a stuntman, the better I'll be as a combat technician, the better I'll be as an actor. And that's when he said, fantastic. And that's when he started going out and trying to find specific people to teach me. That's how actually I landed on the doorstep of Sunny Chiba. You know, there are many things to that. That's where I learned a lot in stage, and a lot of stage combat, and a lot of techniques. Now, there are millions of people out there who would probably listen to this and immediately start screaming. That's one of the reasons I don't like talking about martial arts. There's too many people in martial arts who are not martial in their way, especially in chat rooms, especially over videos. They are argumentative, they are sitting there trying to say what is this style and whose style is better than that style in this lineage or that lineage. I got news for you people. The reality of life is history is written by the winner. But it's not accurate. it's never completely accurate. How could it be? Okay? You could sit there and say that all of the members of the Iga family were killed. And I'd say, well, according to the history book, you're probably right. You're saying that someone who learned Iga's style didn't creep away, even if they weren't the direct family lineage, and start something years later? I mean, obviously they lived. Obviously the last person of that particular family was not killed. You know, same thing with Tokugawa. The Tokugawa shogunate still exists to this day. You know, families in Japan aren't rooted down to extinction. It's made it sound that way through history. In reality, a lot of these people exist. But the only way you're going to find them is by going to Japan and making a pilgrimage. And most of them don't want to be found. And most of them don't want to teach. You know, a lot of senseis looked at me and said, I will not teach you. One of my best friends, and I love him to death. He's just an absolute incredible martial artist. He's a fantastic actor. One of my best friends looked at me and said, I am extremely upset because my sensei said he wouldn't teach you, which means I can't teach you, which means I can't see you. So I'm going to teach you anyway. And he took me off and he taught me a few things. And he said, and now if sensei tracks me down and screams at me, I don't care. And we had a blast for a weekend. And that was when his sensei said, let me rephrase. It's not that I won't teach you. It's not that I wouldn't teach you. It's the fact that in order for me to teach you, you need to be in Japan for longer than you're going to be in Japan. And I said, very well, sensei. Maybe someday I'll return. And he said, thank you. Always welcome at my house. You know, that's the thing. I mean, people wonder about the people I know. I met World War II veterans, some of which were declared dead or whatever, and just living quiet lives. Didn't matter. I mean, talking about them today probably doesn't matter. They may not be alive anymore. They were old in the 80s. They may have died of old age. And because I've been so far away from Japan, I don't know. But the thing is, and I always look at people and say this, if you think I'm good, you should see their daughters. Their daughters make me look like a tired old man. And that's the thing. Their daughters are carrying on their traditions, carrying on their styles, carrying on their weapons and their martial arts history. I don't need to do that. Okay? All I need to do is remember what they taught me and apply it in life. Be an actor and do the things I love to do the most. You know? And sometimes the greatest memories are the ones you cherish and hold closest to yourself. And you don't want to tell people because you don't want to hear what anyone has to say about it. You just want to remember it and enjoy it. One of my senseis looked at me and said that he wouldn't teach me at all. He was an old man. He doesn't even want me to remember his name. And then he looked at me and said, this is my daughter. And he walked out. And his daughter laughed and said, okay, I've got a serious crush on you. But now I'm going to teach you martial arts. And I spent the entire time with his daughter because he didn't want me to remember him. He wanted me to remember his daughter. Okay? And, you know, that's so much of it. And I have to give a shout out to some of the girls in Japan because they went out of their way to get photographed in one thing or another and have their pictures put on the internet, which years later I found just to sit there and say, hey, look, that's a picture of so-and-so. Fantastic. You know, so now I have a photograph of them to remember them. Even though when I knew them, they were 13 and in the photograph they're 21. Who cares? You know, it's just, that's who that person is. And I remember them, and I remember their family, and I remember their family's building, house, farm, whatever. You know, and I trained everywhere, and I had so much fun. Unfortunately, I can't remember everybody. I wish I could. I wish I had more cameras and more recording things back then. I mean, you know, so much of your life you look back on from early days in 70s, 80s, 90s, and you wish to God that the technology had been there, that the money had been there, that the just this same simple fact of a camera. I didn't actually have my first 35 millimeter until I was like done with film at like 18, you know, and that was more my father's fault because he wouldn't allow it. But I'm never going to go into my father. I just put that part of my life out of my memory. There's so many better things. And that's the important thing about martial arts. Martial arts can turn you into a wonderful person if you let it. Okay? The more you study the philosophies, the more you meet people. And the more people you meet, quite often can really build you as a person. And you don't give a damn if you're actually throwing punches or if you're just sitting there talking. Quite often, some of the best times in martial arts is to walk up to a martial artist and talk to them about their life and listen to their travels and talk about your journey. And you have a mixture of conversation where you've learned a great deal about them, they've learned a great deal about you. You've learned about senseis you never knew their name. They learn about senseis they never knew their name. And they don't care, and you don't care. Because they're great stories, you're having the best time of your life, and you can look back on that in the miserable parts of your life. And you can go, yeah, that's what martial arts is. You know, so much in the United States is based on combat, it's based on competition, it's based on this, that, the other thing. Who knows this fact? Who's searched this? Who's understood that? Which sensei is what? Oh my God, the nonsense, especially in chat rooms. And it's horrible. It's absolutely horrible. It almost turns people off of martial arts. And there's so much more to it. It's not just a way of defending yourself. It's not just a competition. It's not just so you can say, well, I got this belt or I worked under that sensei. It's to design your life. It's to help you with your life. You know? I mean, a lot of people look at me sometimes and say things like, why ninjutsu? Why not something else? Why didn't you pick karate or something like that? I didn't pick it. It just sort of exploded around me. And you have to understand what ninjutsu actually is. Ninjutsu is not what everyone says it is. Okay? Everything that people talk about ninjutsu is commercialized. The ancient history of ninjutsu is a modern word. Ninja is a modern word. Okay? These are late terms developed in the maybe 1900s. Okay, most likely in the 1900s. No one can really be sure. Prior to that, they were called shinobi. Now, shinobi was a generic term that wasn't even used by the shinobi. It was actually invented by the shogunates, the daimyos, the emperor. And they created it as a word to mean assassin. And what it basically meant is this way a shogun could say, those are my samurai and those are my shinobi. It was just a way of delineating which warrior could do what. And that was about all it was. Okay, it didn't really have any direct meaning. And then as the centuries wore on, families of specific clans started developing a specific group that would train shinobi to meet the demands of the shogunate. And that's where you get the famous lines like the Tanaka clan, the Koga clan, Iga clan, the Tokugawa shogunate, all of these things. And most of this disappeared after the fall of the Tokugawa shogunate. So it's just kind of a plain, simple bit of nonsense. And when you look at the actual styles of ninjutsu and what ninjutsu technically is, what it is any style that is lethal. Any style that is military. Okay? Technically speaking, if you were a World War II veteran and you learned combat martial arts and where you could go into a building and kill somebody with your bare hands, technically speaking, that's ninjutsu. Okay? Doesn't really matter. So it's all around anyway. It's only the special parts of ninjutsu that starts working with weapons. And in working with weapons, it's more along the lines of specific weapons from the Tiger Scroll that were developed by the original ninja or original shinobi and passed down from generation to generation. So it just becomes an interesting study in what you can do with ancient weaponry. And for a film star, that's critical, And I don't just train with ninja weapons. I train with medieval European weapons. I'm one of the few people in the world who can work theatrically safely with flail. And the biggest problem I have with it is the fact that in most cases they don't create a flail that can be used safely in a setting. In most cases, what are you going to do? Put a couple of plastic balls together with a plastic chain and either the thing will break or either the thing will fall apart in the middle of the spin. And it's been so difficult to create something that would actually work theatrically, which is one of the reasons why so many directors and producers go away from working with a flail. It's one of the most dangerous weapons, and it's hard to create it safely in a theatrical environment. So maybe someday they'll figure out exactly how to work it. You could probably do it CGI and time it well with a CGI actor, someone who's in a complete morphic suit where all of their body lines are recorded by a computer and whatnot. You could possibly do it that way, to where you're twirling an actual morning star around and then make it the entire thing CGI and then implant it into something. That might be an easier way to deal with it. It's hard to tell. The future's open. Anything can happen. But, I worked with all sorts of weapons. I worked with even large weapons. Your two-handed sword, lance, pole weapons, bardaches, that kind of stuff. So, I've had a blast. And in my life, what I do is I just work out with weapons. So, a lot of what you may see in the future, if I do post a few things, is simply just me working out with weapons. I never claim to be anything specific. I'll look at anyone and say, I am the grand master of my own style. Ooh, wow, what does that mean? I'm nobody with nothing. Yeah, and I'm not going to teach you anyway, so who cares? And that's a lot of it, okay? So anyone who wants to try and nitpick my words, I'm thinking about doing something for anti-bullying, but I kind of get bored with it really quick. The stupidest thing in martial arts is when people sit there and try to mince words with you in a chat room. Now, there are a couple of tactics that you can deal with mincing words. Okay? Mincing words is predominantly a fire attack. Why? Because fire needs fuel. Fire has to burn. So fire has to pick on you and be a grammar Nazi and try to pick apart your words and change the meaning of your words and decide a different word for a different meaning for a different word. I'll give you an example of a sentence. Okay? Well, in Japan, a monk taught me this. So the reply is, the monk is from Japan? So you're sitting there rolling your eyes going, yes, Mr. Mincing Words, the monk is from Japan because it's important to understand that it's a Japanese monk, not a Chinese monk or a French monk, that it is in fact actually a Japanese monk in Japan who actually came to the United States because I actually never went to Japan. And he taught me and then he went back to Japan because the meaning of your question and the meaning of the sentence means the monk must be from Japan, but I was never there because he has to have come to the United States. Which is a complete turning around of meaning simply because you don't understand that when I say I was in Japan and I met a Japanese monk. Okay? This is nonsense to sit there and pick on people. This is what bullies do. All right? Now, what can you do with this? One, you can flat ignore it. The best advice to anybody dealing with a bully in a chat room is ignore, block, delete, forget. It's the simplest, easy solution. Going further from that, you can throw water on fire. Now, how exactly can you throw water on fire? Mincing words is predictable. Okay? Just mince words together and decide how it's going to act, how it's going to end. If I do this in a chess match and I sit there and say this and that and this and that, and he'll say this and that and this and that, and I'll say this and that and this and that, and so on and so forth, and you jump to the last sentence you would say, and you say that first. Like, for example, let's say someone looks at you and says something in the neighborhood of, I have two questions. What is this and how old are you? Well, how can you answer this bully? Okay? It's set up to be a bully. Why? Because immediately what he is asking you is, what style is this? But he doesn't want to ask you what style. He just wants to say, what is this? Because he doesn't want to acknowledge that it might be a style. Okay? How old are you? This is an irrelevant question. In most cases, what they try to do to people is they try to give a question that isn't actually a question, but it's designed to sound like a question. And it's designed to be, since you're a sensei, and since you want to talk, and since you want to teach, you'll want to answer my questions. Because this is a question and answer with a sensei. So all senseis want to answer questions. Okay? So what you can do with this is say something very simple like, nice that you have questions. Would that I could guarantee you all the answers. Bing, you've thrown water on fire. They have nowhere to go with it. Okay? You could do something simple like, gee, you have questions. Go and find the answers. Like the rest of us. Go on a quest. Learn. Okay? Anytime you flatline a conversation, you're throwing water on fire. Okay? And that's simple trickery. You can just jump through their hoops to the last line and sit there and go, I ain't going to mince words with you, I'm just going to throw water on fire. Yip-de-doo. Because that's how little anybody means. When people come up to you in chat rooms and they start asking you questions, to ask questions to learn how to nitpick you and mince words with you, the first question you should ask is, who do you think you are and why should I even care? Okay? Especially when they start bringing up names like as if they were the first student of that sensei. Well, they're not even that sensei, so who cares? Even if they were the first student, they're not the sensei. So the sensei is not talking to you, so why do you care what the student says? You wouldn't believe the nonsense I've heard in ninjutsu chat rooms about this particular school of martial arts or that particular. And the funniest thing is, in the 80s, when ninjutsu started in the United States, there was only one dojo. And that dojo was taught by Stephen K. Hayes. And every single one of these martial artists that walk up to you and talk about ninjutsu and talk about this sensei or that sensei never mention Stephen K. Hayes or the Quest Center in Dakota. Which tells you right off the bat they have no idea what they're talking about. Even if more has come over, because they are completely ignoring the fact that recognized in the United States, Stephen K. Hayes is the expert. Okay? So, get your facts straight. And don't talk to me about lineage, because it's the stupidest thing on earth. Who cares? Martial arts is not about what can you find in a book and what can you prove from this book to that book and who's right and who's wrong. Martial arts is about helping people become martial artists. I don't care if you're a white belt or a black belt. Not every lecture is for black belts, but every lecture is for black belts. That's a karate statement in the United States. Why? Because it's a teach. It says, one, most conversations that senseis give are to the white belts, are to the people that are not even white belts, are to the people that are not even martial artists. They are trying to get other people interested in the martial arts. They're trying to sit there and say, hey, you're in the hood, you're in the inner city, you're having problems, you're dealing with all of this. Find a dojo, learn some martial arts. Not to defend yourself, but to better yourself. Okay? Because I'll tell you here and now, I don't care if you screw up. At least you're doing it. And that's more important than the people who claim everything in the universe. That you are doing it is what matters. Okay? Now, the other reason of why is every lesson for black belts? Because every black belt should learn how to talk to white belts and to the public.